On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Raphael Mudge drops by to tell us all about Shellshock. Then IxChariot drops in to tell us about their IxChariot. Twiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 109, recorded September 29th, 2014, the IxChariot. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Braintree. If you're a developer or manager of a mobile app and searching for the right payments API, check out the new One-Touch product by Braintree, the fastest, easiest, most secure way to pay in-app. To learn more, and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, go to BraintreePayments.com/twit. Welcome to Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And this week I'm joined by my good friend, Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, how are things going in Honolulu?
I'm hoping I stay online. Something weird is happening to University of Hawaii Network, and our commodity routing seems to be lost in Never Never Land.
Well, if you drop out or if you get mysteriously disconnected, we'll know why. Now, before that happens, let's get straight into the blips. This first one comes to us from, well, Google itself. Guess what? They've decided they're going to build a brand new mega data center, and they're doing it in the Netherlands. Over the next 2 years, Google will pump more than $770 million into a giant 120-megawatt data center in Eemshaven, Netherlands. The new data center will create 150 new jobs, will be operational by the first half of 2016, and should be fully operational by the end of 2017. The location isn't an accident. The megacenter uses a free cooling design that will reduce energy consumption by 50% by utilizing ambient air and gray water to cool the servers. Also, Eemshaven is the home of several renewable energy initiatives and, most importantly, is the landing point for many international fiber trunks. This is the fourth megacenter that Google has parked in Europe, but probably not the last.
Well, this is a feel-good story from Digital Trends. Coca-Cola and British Telecom are experimenting with adding free Wi-Fi to its vending machines in South Africa. Is your neighborhood next? In hopes of making a difference for underserved areas of the world, Coke and BT are kicking off a trial project using Coca-Cola vending machines as Wi-Fi hotspots. Their project hopes to provide more education, health, and innovation opportunities and perhaps serve as a model for a neighborhood near you. The Wi-Fi will be free to access and no Coke purchase is necessary to take advantage of it. The two sites chosen, one in Kunu, Umtata, and Buck Ridge, Mumpalagang, are close to schools, shopping centers, and taxi ranks. These sites were strategically chosen for the accessibility, according to a press release put out by BT. So this philanthropy seems to be a Coke trend. First with their Slingshot vapor distillation system for free potable water at the Coca-Cola Eco Centers, and now free Wi-Fi in their vending machines. Is Coke trying to get their first place brand status back from Apple?
Well, we're no good at pronouncing foreign cities, so let's talk about NASs instead. Synology is adding private cloud virtualization functionality to their series of popular NASs. If you run a small to medium business, Synology wants to give you enterprise private cloud tools at a SOHO price. Synology, maker of high-performance NASs that are popular within the SOHO and SMB crowd, is about to release a version of its Disk Station Manager operating system that includes private cloud and virtualization features. NoteStation is a private cloud-based blog-style WYSIWYG word processor that allows for network users to easily create, share, and edit documents in the cloud without ever touching the internet. DSM 5.1 will also include a tool for those who use their boxes for virtualization storage. The tool allows users to clone images without the need for a hypervisor to spawn the clone back to shared storage. All of this means that you can have the benefit of using a cloud storage solution without actually being in the cloud.
While only a smidgen enterprisey, the U.S. Forestry Service wants to charge you $1,500 for a permit to photo or video anything in the 36 million square miles of public land. Even if your commercial use is nonprofit, the U.S. Forestry Service could fine you up to $1,000 for using a photograph or video that you took on lands that belong to we the people. So a car commercial in the Redwoods would need to pay for the privilege, or if Big Sur is in the background of your public service announcement, you would have to fork over $1,500 for a permit. My comment is, let's write to our congressional delegation and suggest that if the U.S. Forestry Service wants to play this game, that Congress should remove their funding and make them support themselves. And oh yeah, we, the people, should charge the Forestry Service rent on our land. How the Forestry Service plans on enforcing this proposed rule change is still nebulous.
According to a report published by Incapsula, a cloud security vendor who was actually on This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 103, talking about exploits they found in Drupal and WordPress, there have been an estimated 1 billion Shellshock attacks since it was announced 4 days ago. Incapsula's own servers have detected and deflected more than 217,000 exploit attempts across their 4,115 domains. Digging into those attacks, Incapsula documented 890 offending IP addresses from across the world that were pushing the exploits. And more worrisome, most believe that this is only a warm-up while the exploit kits are prepared. One last bit of news breaking out of the Twit Brickhouse. According to staffer Jeffrey Needles, the 49ers still own the Eagles. Now let's get straight to the meat of the first segment. We welcome back to the show our security guru, Mr. Raphael Mudge, the Armitage hacker from AdvancedPentest.com. Raphael, first of all, thank you for coming on Twit. I know you just finished a conference. You're probably pretty tired, and we really appreciate your time.
I'm glad to be here, Padre.
Now, every time you come on Twit, you scare the pants off of us. This time, you're coming to explain something to us that has been scaring and not scaring people over the last 4 days, and that is this Shellshock, the Bash vulnerability. First of all, how big is this? So there's a lot of people saying that this is the biggest exploit that has ever been discovered, that this is far greater than the old Heartbleed bug. What does this mean to you as a security researcher?
Well, as a security researcher, I think this is a great opportunity for security researchers to get themselves in front of the media. And for security researchers everywhere, that's a really good thing for them. For the rest of you, this may not be that big of a deal. Everybody's still trying to figure out how deep this goes. But let's be very clear. This is not necessarily a problem in Bash. I mean, it is a problem, but it's more of a broken assumption. There's a lot of programs, execute stuff, will actually say, hey, I want to pass to the shell these parameters. I want to run this program. And it's well known you can't trust anything that comes from a user. You have to sanitize that. What people didn't realize before was anything that's passed to the environment to kind of configure things before you run the program, well, there's ways to get code execution off of that as well. And that's where the assumptions of Bash have been broken for folks, and that's why people are freaking out, and we've got potential problems to scrub for.
Right. Now, Mudge, the Born Again show was released back in 1989, so by any metric, it's old. It's really old, and in internet time, it's ridiculously old. So what are the assumptions that were made back in 1989 that don't hold true today?
Okay, so first, security is one of the things that evolves, right? Back in 1989, there probably wasn't the assumption that this command interpreter was going to constantly be fed to kind of internet-facing applications, or even, well, let me back up. And don't mind me, folks, if I seem a little scrambled. I'm fighting a little bit of a migraine today. So this idea that the environment, I think folks assumed it was safe. I used to write scripts, web applications using something called CGI, the Common Gateway Interface, in the late 1990s. And I would stuff data into the environment all day long saying, and kick off an application to run, and I always assumed it was okay. I didn't assume that there was a way for a user to provide something that would trigger Bash into actually executing the next piece of data as a command and letting them do whatever they want. So that's a pretty big assumption that's been broken for a lot of old applications.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you this, because it was released on Thursday of last week, but within hours, we already saw attacks in the wild. Is that typical? Do you see that? I mean, we didn't see that with Heartbleed, where the proof of concept came out, and then immediately we started seeing attacks en masse. What makes Shellshock different in that it can be implemented so quickly?
Oh, sure. It's really easy to check for in a simple case. All you're doing is, I'll give you an example. So when I browse to a website, some information gets passed from my browser to the web server in the headers, like my user agent, which browser I'm using. And sometimes, I was checking my servers for this last week, sometimes the environment you might run an application from might automatically pass that information to the environment of any programs you run. And so all somebody had to do was just change their user agent to say, hey, I'm a bash function, semicolon, here's the stuff I want to run. So it was very trivial to check for and to actually make it do something of possible interest to an attacker. And some folks were doing this just to see how many hosts on the internet might have been in this trivial case I brought up, demonstrating vulnerability to this. One person at Radisec, I think .org.com, he swept the internet and tried to run ping via his user agent variable. And he said he got back about 3,000 responses. Whether or not what he did to test was ethical, but that's a whole other debate.
Right, right. Let me ask this, because I think this is a question that a lot of people have been wondering about since this was announced, and that is, how does it actually work? So if you were to explain to a layman how this born-again shell from all those years ago, which every Linux user who's worth his salt knows how to run, could be exploited in this way. What is the attack? How does it work? How would you run it if you were an attacker?
Okay, sure. So let me explain it like this. So when you run the shell, it's a command interpreter, right? You put in your commands and it runs it, gives you back output. That's not the whole game, though. The shell also has something called an environment. And in those environment are variables, things that you can set. You can do things like set display equals :0 to say, hey, this is my X Windows display. Here's where I want you to put programs. That's, a Unix thing. So you can configure all programs that run now and into the future through these environment variable options. Normally, it's considered pretty harmless. What was not realized, though, was that you could, one, define a function in environment variable, or I should say that is realized, is kind of considered okay. Like, say, hey, I've got this variable. The beginning of this variable is a bash function, which by itself is harmless, is not being called or invoked. But if you put a semicolon after that and put in another command, when that environment's loaded, the fact that a function is defined there and then a semicolon, some other command, the other command gets executed. And that's something, it's more of a side effect. It is a bug. It wasn't intentional, but it's just a surprise side effect that's led to implications for whether or not you could put untrusted user input into your environment. And the answer is no, you can't. Until last week, none of us, I certainly didn't realize that.
Right. Again, as a security researcher, would you say that this was probably found out by someone just pounding on bash and realizing that if you appended a bunch of information to the end of the script, it executed?
So last week I saw on Thursday the coordinated disclosure on the bug. I didn't dig far enough yet. Went off to a conference, just got back, and who discovered it and what the circumstances were of how they discovered it. So I can't answer how that came about, but we should be very thankful that it has been found so we can address it and going forward, avoid problems like this.
Let's talk about addressing it in just a bit. I want to bring Cheebert back into the discussion. Cheebert, you work in an academic setting, on a campus, a university campus. And there's already been a press release from Apple saying, look, most of the people who use our devices aren't going to be vulnerable to this. There's already been releases saying unless it's a server and it has a CGA, a common gateway interface, it's probably not going to be affected by this. But like, for example, the Encapsula data that we got this morning shows that, yes, there have been tens of thousands of exploited machines, but there's a decent percentage, like 6 or 7%, that are not servers. So obviously, this extends beyond just boxes sitting in a data center somewhere. What are the concerns in an environment like yours?
Oh, keep in mind, there only 6 or 7% may not be servers, but I'll just bet you 6 or 7% are people that have their sharing turned on.
Right.
Especially on Macs, it's really, really easy to share a folder, share this, share that. VNC is got kind of a web-ish front end. So when you start turning sharing on Macs or whatever's, and you don't remember to turn it off, you leave those vulnerabilities open. So I'll just bet you, well, maybe I won't bet, but I'll lay even odds that some of the problems that I'm having currently on the University of Hawaii campus is because people haven't caught up on their patching. At my school, we've been patching like crazy, and SonicWall actually gave me a private bulletin on Friday, so I've been patching since Friday.
Right. Mudge wrote about that because we've got 8-Bit Steve in the chat room, one of our more intelligent users, who says that, wait a minute, opening ports, does that necessarily lead to a bash vulnerability? Like, let's say your Mac, let's say your Linux desktop, whatever it's going to be, is running a vulnerable edition of Bash. They have not yet patched it. Is there a specific port or service that they have to have running, or is it just anything that touches the outside world?
No, absolutely. So the scary thing about this bug is it's one of the things, it sounds really scary and big, but it's going to be a very narrow set of circumstances where it really manifests itself as a problem, okay? But computers are complex, so it's going to take a while before those things are sorted out. Let me give you an example, though, of something folks were immediately worried about and what we saw at DerbyCon, where I just came from. On Linux, for example, the DHCP client, the thing that gets your address on a network, oftentimes the information, some of the information the DHCP server hands off to the DHCP client might get stuffed into an environment variable, and a shell script might get run to configure your networking stack, okay? In those cases, and for example, Kali Linux, a Linux distribution I use quite a bit, that happens. So it's possible for somebody on the same network to put a rogue DHCP server and poison the network with data for anybody doing a DHCP request to try to get access to their system. That's an example of this bug interacting with something that's untrusted input, allowing somebody to do something you wouldn't want them to do. Okay. Right. Is that universal for all internet-facing applications? No, not at all. The fact that something's just online as a service, it's very tiny, very unlikely that this bug triggers it. And as Retro D saying in the chat room, and absolutely, this is just the Bash shell. Dash, Z shell, and others are not known to have this particular vulnerability. That said, this is a class of vulnerabilities that you've got to be aware of. I'd like to draw an analogy to a vulnerability from early last year that had to do with Ruby on Rails.
Yes, please.
Okay, so last year, a lot of Ruby on Rails applications could accept a YAML file. Sometimes user could upload a YAML file or influence data that went into it. And all was well and good. A YAML file was seen as just a dumb configuration file, text file. But the YAML specification actually had options to allow the file, when parsed and run, to actually kind of dynamically do things that would trigger Ruby code. And so by piecing a few things together through what was otherwise considered to be a dumb configuration file, you could run arbitrary code. And this is the same kind of thing. It's something people normally trusted before. And if your design led to you using this mechanism to run things and you passed certain untrusted information to it, you could be getting letting somebody have code execution.
Right.
But it's a narrow set of circumstances where that can happen. It's not this universal kind of thing.
Right. So, yeah. So, I mean, generally we can say it's not just having a port open. There has to be some sort of service running behind that port that allows for remote code execution, something that actually reads, for example, DHCP, an environment variable. What are some other common services that you think might be a vector for that kind of attack?
Okay, so of course, take a look at your CGI applications. Okay, so any, nobody writes CGI applications anymore. They're rare. They're sometimes in smaller form factor devices.
I still write them. Wait a minute. Hold on.
Padre, no, don't do that. It's old. Something I was checking last week on my own server. One of the websites I run, it sends me email, and the way I send email is I kick off user bin send mail, and I do an exec to run this program. You know, I sanitize the email address and everything I send, so the user's not injecting things into my shell. But I actually had to validate whether or not the web application environment I had passed environment information, like the user agent, passed user's user agent into my shell. Fortunately, it didn't. Okay, in my particular case. But this is the kind of stuff you need to check. But web applications is the big one. If there's jailed shells in a Linux environment, and I have to back up on this to explain what I mean. Back in when I worked at an ISP back in 1999, I had a help desk interface that our help desk could log into. They were able to just SSH. Well, they telnet it at the time. Don't tell anybody. Shh. But today they would SSH in potentially, and they would get this interface that I had set as their shell. Because of this vulnerability, they might actually be able to break out of that much more easily than I had thought.
Right.
So it's still being figured out, the full scope of where this applies. But in general, it's actually, in most cases, most servers, most situations, it's not something that you might have a vulnerable version of Bash, but nothing is actually using Bash in such a way that a remote attacker could take advantage of it. That's a very special set of circumstances.
Mudge, I know that this is early days and you still have to look over the code. You have to look over the research to see exactly where this exploit's going to fall inside of, say, a Metasploit and an exploit kit. But my question to you would be twofold. First, how do we mitigate this? So what should corporations, businesses, individuals be looking at doing, aside from just patch? And the second thing is there some sort of systematic change that we could make here to prevent exploits like this from happening in the future?
Okay, sure. Well, first, let's start with the systematic aspect. This comes down to a really fundamental principle of security. You should never, ever, ever trust any input from an untrusted source, okay? And things like headers passed from your browser to your web server, that's input from an untrusted source. Now, of course, what broke for us is we thought that environment variables were this harmless thing where we could never get code execution out of that. So we passed that untrusted input to it, but we got bit by that assumption. So it might be fair to say anything that leaves your application in any sort of way needs to be sanitized in some sort of way. But that's asking a lot. Now, I'm a developer. We're lazy. We have assumptions about our environment and how things work. This is just one of those assumptions that broke. Now, how would I audit for it? I would go look at anything that's internet facing, okay? And start with, say, your web applications. Look anywhere where another program is called, okay? And try to find out, try to attack it, try to find out, is the environment a clean environment when that new program starts? Or is the environment somehow inherited from the web application? And is that inherited environment, does it contain some sort of information that the user, an untrusted source, could control? And that's what you need to look at. And that's what I was doing last week, because when I first saw this, I didn't know if I was vulnerable. And I'll tell you, I was checking because I didn't want to be gone over the weekend and get hit with it. So the best practices and the kind of things we rely on every day and what's really vulnerable to this and what's not, that's going to come out over the course of the next few weeks. And you're going to find there's probably a few very narrow circumstances where something that people do rely on a lot is vulnerable, could be attacked, and it's going to get fixed, and life is going to go on for the rest of us. One other note, though, about the patch thing. The patch that came out last week was incomplete. It was possible to circumvent it and still have the same effect. So the patch is a very basic stopgap at this time. And a Google researcher, Michael Zaleski, came out and said that there's another CVE related to this that's going to drop. So what you're seeing and the patches for it, there's still more to come, it looks like. But folks are actually looking at this problem, and just be very, very careful when you're passing things to the shell from an internet-facing application.
Mudge, once again, thank you so very much. It's great having you as our security guru on call. I know you're busy. I know you're jumping around the world, so I do appreciate the time. If you could please tell the folks at home where they could find you. We know that you're the Armitage Hacker. It's at Armitage Hacker on Twitter. But where can they find your work and your tools?
Sure. Okay, so you can learn a little bit more about me at blog.cobaltstrike.com. I blog there about once a week. And that's my website, advancedpentest.com, for my Cobalt Strike product for red teams and working with intrusion response and intrusion detection. So with that, I'm sure we'll have more on this issue a little bit later. But Padre, thanks for letting me come on, talk about kind of where things are at today. And for those of you, trust your security professionals, give them the latitude to actually look at your environment, find out what's going on, and keep calm and chive on.
I think Sinak in our chat room gives you the best compliment we can give you when he says, that dude's a walking exploit. That's Raphael Mudge, the advanced pen tester at advancedpentest.com, the Armitage Hacker. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Take care.
Now, after the break, we're going to be bringing in a brand new guest, a new face to the Twiet Riot, the Twit army that focuses here on enterprise technology, who's going to be talking about a new product, a developing product from Ixia. But before that, let's take a break to welcome to the Twiet Riot a brand new sponsor. Now, if you're a mobile app developer, then you probably know how difficult it can be to find a mobile app payment processor. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, sometimes you can find an app processor that gives an easy way to integrate into your app, but it won't be secure or reliable. Sometimes you find a secure and reliable source, but it's not the easiest thing to integrate into your app. What you want is that perfect combination. The way to integrate this code into whatever app that you're developing and have it scalable, have it grow with you. That's why we're happy to welcome Braintree, the choice for developers who need to accept payments to the Twiet Riot. Now let's break it down. You want a payment API that is easy to integrate into your app, but you also need it to be secure and scalable so that it can grow with your company. There can't be any questions about uptime because downtime is money down the drain. That's why companies like Uber, Airbnb, Hotel Tonight, Living Social, and GitHub have turned to Braintree for a payment API. They scaled with these companies from early-stage startups to the successful companies that they are today. That means that you can trust Braintree to scale with your business from processing your first dollar to your billionth. By using the Braintree Payment API, you get a full-stack payment solution that supports all payment types your customers might want to use. That includes credit cards, debit cards, PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, 130 different currencies from around the planet, and yeah, even Bitcoin. Plus, it does all that across platforms with integrated fraud protection and customer support. You might think that that kind of functionality comes with some hefty development time, taking weeks or maybe even months, but no. The Braintree Payment API supports Android, iOS, and JavaScript clients with only 10, that's right, 10 lines of in-app code. They've got SDKs in .NET, Node.js, Java, Perl, PHP, Python, and Ruby, and they give you the code that you can integrate into your site or app to be up and running and accepting payments literally within minutes. You can even call their best-in-class customer support, and you'll get a live person who won't just help you, but can actually walk you through every step of the integration process. Of course, an easy-to-use payment system that isn't secure is worthless, and that's why Braintree uses tokens to secure customers' payment information so that credit cards are never passed to a merchant server. Steve Gibson talked about this on Security Now. Now, Braintree is known for their back-end security and merchant protection, and the fact that users' financial information is never stored on your server means that if you're using Braintree, even if you get hacked, you don't have to worry about the fraudsters going on a crime spree with your customers' cards because you never had them in the first place. Braintree is the fastest, easiest, and most secure way to pay. But I think that what really sets Braintree apart is that it's not just a payment API, it's a way to increase your sell-through. They're trying to help solve a huge problem in online commerce, namely that a 70% cart abandonment rate is normal, and it's even higher in mobile. By offering one-touch payments for your mobile app, your customers can check out if they have the PayPal app installed on their phones. Gone are the days of entering data fields and sharing credit card information. One and done, securely, easily, quickly, and with much less risk of customers giving up on a purchase. And if that weren't enough, Braintree will give you the first $50,000 in transactions absolutely fee-free. Now, here's what we want you to do. If you're an app developer or a manager, check out Braintree today at braintreepayments.com/twit. Review their documentation. It's simple and concise. Play around in their sandbox. That lets you give Braintree a try with no commitment and the ability to test your integration before going into production. Once you've decided to implement One Touch, your first 50,000 in transactions are fee-free. That's braintreepayments.com/twit. braintreepayments.com/twit. And if you've used Airbnb, Uber, Hotel Tonight, Living Social Fab, or GitHub, let us know what you think about Braintree by tweeting at Braintree. That's braintree.com, braintreepayments.com/twit. And we thank Braintree for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get to the meat of the episode. We welcome Taran from IxChariot. Taran, thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Glad to be here.
Now, you are here as representative of IxChariot. Could you please explain to the folks who might be watching at home, what is IxChariot?
Yeah, sure can. IxChariot is a technology solutions provider. We sell to a lot of the equipment manufacturers. We sell to enterprises, service providers, and government. Now, we offer two different portfolio of solutions, test and measurement, and network visibility solutions to R&D labs, global labs around the world, to enterprise security teams and network operations groups. To give you an example of some of the products that we develop and sell, some of the earliest in network testing for 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig, all the way up to 400 gig interfaces for testing switches, routers, firewalls, unified threat management platforms, Wi-Fi infrastructure, and LTE deployments, all usually fit for IxChariot's products and solutions. On the visibility side, we provide access to critical aspects in your network by giving you intercept points and being able to take that data and do analysis. So, for example, taps, network packet brokers, bypass or inline, are some of the products that we have there. And in a nutshell, we act as a trusted advisor and technology provider to our customers.
Right. Taran, I've got experience with IxChariot. Both Brian, Chee, and I remember when we would get the super secret sacred IxChariot box out of its shipping container. We'd plug it into our network at Interop, and it would stress test everything. And that was my first exposure to your technology, that you had the ability to generate, to simulate hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of users, to push as much data across your network as it could handle without breaking. Now, that's kind of your lineage, but you've gone beyond that, right? I mean, you're not just a stress tester anymore.
And you're absolutely right. This is the heritage and lineage of IxChariot, where we used to have products that were used by our technology equipment manufacturers to stress test. So, for example, if you needed to know if a router can handle hundreds of gigabits per second of traffic without having any packet losses, you would rely on IxChariot. Now, over the years, we've actually moved from having solutions for the R&D teams into selling into governments and enterprises, and that allowed us to do things differently. We're focused previously in labs And at this point, we're focused a lot on the labs where the research and development of products are done, as well as the customer of our R&D customers that we sell into, so enterprises. And in doing so, we've expanded our portfolio. We've made a number of acquisitions to let us sell into what we'd call production networks and live operating network for our customers.
Right. I want to bring Chee back into the conversation here because he's got way more experience with IxChariot boxes than I. Chee, I remember the first time you introduced me to IxChariot. I was still generating traffic with a bunch of these little teeny tiny PCs. I had baker's racks filled with them, and that's how I would push traffic. I would try to stress my network, and then you showed me a single IxChariot box that was in your network that could just jam the pipes solid. When did you start using them, and why was it such an important piece of your lab testing equipment?
I'm not quite sure when I first started using it. Errol Ginsberg was still at the helm, so it was, God, at least a decade, probably more. I've been following IxChariot from very, very far. In fact, one of my first IxChariot boxes was actually based on Windows 95, so put that into perspective. Now, keep in mind, one of the things that makes the stress testing portion of the IxChariot boxes also special is some really, really sexy custom silicon. The bulk of the PCs out in the world, no matter what you do to it, say for instance you've got a gig interface, I'd be really surprised if you could get any machine, no matter how much you strip down, up over about 600 meg per second off a gig interface. Even sending teeny tiny little packets or even big packets, doesn't matter. The IxChariot boxes are purpose-built to do performance validation. So as a result, my IxChariot box has 10 SFP slots, so I can put in optical or copper, doesn't matter. And I can run all 10 of those interfaces at full gig line rate. And it's not just bit blasting. Bit blasting is so passé, so last year. And no, we're actually doing things like layer 7 simulation. In fact, one of the cool things about the integration of the Chariot product line is now you can actually run Chariot on some of the IxChariot hardware, so that I can run IxChariot script simulations to do all kinds of really cool things. In fact, the firewall test that I did that's had so many hits was based upon IxChariot gear. I actually had a regional firewall. We confirmed that it could actually pass X number of megabits per second. Then I ramped up 2,000 IPsec VPN connections and then ran synthetic traffic over that. And then we went and attacked the firewalls. So it gave me a very, very good idea of real-world simulations on what can be done and confirm those glossy brochures that the manufacturers love to pass out. And we have proven many, many, many of those glossies as being a little too optimistic.
Those glosses are typically in a vacuum in space with the time vortex inside the TARDIS is when that spec would actually come true. But Taran, let me ask you this. We seem to have moved past that point. Chee and I love geeking out over how much traffic we can push onto our networks.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the old metric. The old metric used to be hook up an IxChariot box to your network, blast it. If nothing breaks, then of course everything's okay. Of course you've got better performance. We've become a bit more sophisticated than that, right? I mean, now we actually look for transparency into the network. What does that transparency mean?
Yeah, I wanna back up a little bit and comment on Brian's on observation. So it's very true. Over the years, we've done a lot of packet blasting, bit blasting to assume that the silicon can run fast. So, but in modern day compute, you happen to have very large frames for storage. You may happen to have very small packets, which are used for mobile network data transfer. And these things have a dramatic impact on a firewall's performance, as an example, or an end-to-end network. And so what we've done is elevated the way in which we test. And so aside from bit blasting, we can do real applications. For example, a Perfect Storm 1 platform, which happens to have 10 onboard 810 gig ports on it to do line rate performance. This includes SSL VPN, IPsec, as well as applications that you run on your network, including web applications. A myriad of them all run on port 80, but in fact, UTM platforms and others actually can intercept those HTTP flows and determine the quality of experience on those. So being able to elevate the way in which our customers test actually helps them, because that is how their products are actually used by their customers.
Right, right. Now, let's talk a little bit about how this has evolved. When I want to see how my network is performing, and you mentioned this, it's not just a matter of bid blasting. I need to know how my users are actually going to be experiencing the network. It's more important for me as a network administrator to know if the president of some division is going to be complaining because he can't get to the services that he has to get to, or because access is really, really slow. But most of the old tools aren't set up that way. Most of the old tools are set up, if I can ping, if I can get access to a device, then that must mean everything is okay. How has IxChariot changed that?
Yeah, good question. So that leads me into talking a little bit about some of the problems that enterprises have that we see frequently. And, you know, we take network now for granted. So, for example, we always are on Wi-Fi. We don't even think about it twice. And this is, and rightly so, because we do a lot of our business applications on that. And so voice calls, video, VDI, screen sharing, IM, storage traffic, blended infrastructure like VM, physical compute, they all have taken the network for granted. So the way we are bringing our assessment solutions into the mix is to roll out a number of software endpoints into the network, to be able to have access to different parts of the network and really demark them. And that helps us get into places in the network, create traffic profiles. And to give you a great example, if you look into roll out voice over IP, and believe it or not, not a lot of enterprises have yet rolled out voice over IP. So they'd be very interested to do a pre-assessment. Is my network going to be able to handle 50 voice calls? And so we take endpoints, deploy them into the remote sites and into the data centers, and actually run voice over IP calls, and actually look at the quality of voice across that end-to-end network. That is how you really are able to see if that network is going to be able to actually take voice calls.
Okay, well, I think this makes sense to us. I think our audience gets it, that you want to be able to see in your network to see whether or not it's actually going to be able to support the services you want to push across it. But can you show us how you would now do that? We know what the problem is. We understand what the problem is. How would you and, say, the IxChariot be able to help me figure out the information I need to know?
Yeah, we have two products in the IxChariot family. One is IxChariot, and the other one is IxChariot Pro. Both are software products. One is used for instant assessment, and I'll talk through a little bit about that shortly. It runs on your devices. So, for example, you can use any number of your own devices in your network to actually conduct the tests, and you can use it to do spot test troubleshooting. To give an example, if you're looking to see if there's an issue between floors in your building and you wanted to do a assessment of the network, if you thought that your building A and building B had a 10 gig interconnect and you wanted to validate that in fact it is actually what it's supposed to be, or you wanted to verify very quickly if there's an issue that a user reports from their desktop they're having right now, you can very quickly roll out IxChariot as a solution onto the user's desktop and do very quick spot checks to verify the performance of your network. The very same is true for devices that are mobile. So you can actually put our endpoints on the mobile devices to assess the performance of APs as they get rolled out into an environment. Now, as you move from being able to do basic spot checking, troubleshooting, and looking at the performance of your network, if you want to get into a habit of being proactive about it, the IxChariot Pro enables you to do that by doing continuous monitoring of your network end-to-end by putting probes in the network. They can be software-based, which means you can actually put them on just about any device that you have, as well as our turnkey products that we sell that are rolled out. And what it lets you do is do tests continuously that you instrument. And one of the big advantages of doing that is you don't rely on user traffic to actually see if the network is up, if you can reach it. As an example, if it's 3 a.m. and there's nobody in the office, is your network up? You don't know unless you actually have a scheduled test to run every hour, let's say on the hour, with instrumented traffic to then validate that the network is up at that hour.
What kind of traffic can these probes create? For example, I'm thinking that would be a perfect way to see what the user would actually see. So you're not just pinging the probe, you're saying, can you reach these services and what kind of speed are you getting?
Yeah, we break them down into two. One is data applications. So, for example, reaching a public server like Facebook.com, and being able to look at the experience of loading that page, how long it took, tells you the health of the network and the experience a user has actually accessing web services. The other one is really focused on enterprises' real-time applications, so voice over IP, unified communications, video screen sharing, all of these where we provide you a mean opinion score for all of the transactions, for example, on voice over IP, to be able to know that the network can carry that application well.
Chee, let me throw this over to you because you've got an interesting use for an IxChariot. I know that you've played around with a couple of Ixia's big boxes and a lot of their software. You like to run these sorts of hypothetical scans of what would the network look like with X number of services late at night when no one's on the network. You essentially try to take up the unused network cycles to figure out what it is that you have to develop during the day.
Yeah, basically what we do is in an off-hour time frame so that I have very little impact on the operation of my enterprise, I can run synthetic traffic and simulate web traffic, FTP traffic, voice over IP traffic, IM traffic, you name it. There's a huge list of services that I could just check off and say I'd like to simulate that using IxChariot. And IxChariot is one of those great things. You need a console, that's the license piece, but you don't, or at least you didn't have to pay for the endpoints. I could put endpoints all over the place and run this giant mesh of traffic and simulate the next big upgrade that I'm planning on doing for my network. So I have the warm and fuzzy that I can find my bottlenecks beforehand, before my users start ringing my phone off the hook saying, well, you rolled out this new service and it doesn't work. I'd like to avoid that if all possible, and synthetic traffic is a great way of doing it and being able to validate your upgrades before you roll them out.
There's very few things that are more embarrassing than saying, oh yeah, the network's perfect now, and then having it go down. Yeah, I would like to avoid that. Taran, we've heard a little bit about what it should provide. Can you actually show us the data that I would get back from, say, an IxChariot installation? Yeah,
I can do that. And I was going to back up a step and talk briefly about a couple of key things that Brian also talked about. And one of them is how it works, just to give the audience a chance to see how the structure of the software and solution comes together. There's a central console, something that you can actually install, deploy. It's a virtual appliance that everyone's very familiar with, which means you can access all and run everything through a web browser. And then, as Brian mentioned, there are these performance endpoints that you can deploy on any number of devices. And I'll take a minute to talk through that because it's very relevant. We can deploy, it's a very small piece of code that runs and turns a device that you own and that you operate into a test port, let's call it. So this can be a server, it could be a virtual server. It can be a very small device that you roll out into your network, such as a Raspberry Pi, for example, that runs on ARM processors. Really, it still runs Linux, on which we can deploy an endpoint. Or it could be a mobile phone, such as an iPhone or an Android-based phone, that you can turn into a test port that lets you access the Wi-Fi network. So, very true, Brian. These endpoints are free, that you can download them from our library, and that turns any device that you deploy in your network that you want to know performance from into a hardware that you can use to actually run some tests.
All right. And the actual data?
Yeah. And let me switch here very quickly to walk you through some of the setup very quickly here. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the latest version of IxChariot. And for those who are not familiar with it, as I mentioned, there's a console that you deploy as a virtual appliance. And here I have it deployed on 192.168.159.133. It's role-based, so that means you can log in as different individuals to run unrelated tests. And everything that you create to qualify your network are based on endpoints. So endpoints obviously have IP connectivity. So to run any test, you'd create a flow group, which happens to be right here. They defines sort of the logic around the test profile. So as an example, if you happen to have 10 mobile devices, you might have 10 sources. And if you want to terminate all of that traffic onto a central endpoint in your data center, you would have one destination. So you can very quickly have 10 to 1 traffic profile. So here I'm going to be running a very basic test. It's a VM to VM test to just look at the VM fabric and the performance of running a TCP application over a VM infrastructure. So here I have added the source endpoint, and as I mentioned, you would type in the endpoint address, or we can discover it automatically on your network. And I've picked one here, 192.168.159.134, and the destination is going to be .135. Now these can be deployed. This, as I mentioned, is our 2 VM guest OSs. They can very well be 2 endpoints that are deployed on 2 very different sites in your company. The next thing you do is you decide the nature of the traffic. So here, when we talked about the types of things that we can run, one of the most common things that our customers run is to know the network. And what does that mean? To be able to qualify the performance of a network just by looking at TCP or UDP traffic. We can also very quickly get into streaming traffic, voice over IP to do quality of service. But I'm going to be running a basic TCP test. So it's a script that I run here, which I already have. And I'm going to decide that I'll model about 5 users, flows. And I'm going to run it for a very short duration, let's say for a minute. And that's all you really need to do to configure just about any test in IxChariot, and hit the start button. So this time, the instructions from the console are sent to the endpoints, and it's going to run a test. And all tests have real-time metrics that are reported back to the console. So for example, this, you might see a very high throughput. Naturally, this happens because we're running in a VM environment and we're switching internally. So you'll see, you start to see the aggregate throughput, minimum, maximum averages. On the right-hand side, you'll start to see sort of all the bits and bytes of what was sent, what was received, some measured times. And I'll focus a couple of things on throughput, because this is really telling you you've got a VM stood up in a guest environment and a second one. If you wanted to run TCP-based traffic, what were the best numbers going to look like when you run traffic sustained over that vSwitch? And so you get to quickly measure performance really by just rolling out 2 endpoints and conducting tests very quickly in this manner. Okay. Now I can actually set up another test as well. And what I'm going to change is just to give you an idea on adding voice over IP traffic, to tell you how we conduct pre-deployment assessments for voice over IP. So I'll select 711 mu codec, which in any case are very, very small packets. They're 64 kilobytes in each direction. And I'm going to disable this. Let's make an assumption that we'd like to run a 40, let's say maybe just 12 simultaneous voice calls across the network, and see what it looks like from the perspective of actually a quality of experience for those voice calls.
So what you can actually do right now, with this tool, you can set up certain situations. Now, could I layer them? Could I say, let's have 24 voice calls going at the same time that I'm doing a data transfer, at the same time that I'm doing a sync, at the same time that I'm doing, I don't know, attack traffic?
Yeah. So, and the shorter answer is yes. That's sort of the intention. You normally would like to baseline the network, bring in a very specific service and maybe just run it as a best case scenario. And then move into being more realistic about what your network might look like. So what does that mean? You might decide to have 5 to 10 different services that are background traffic. And then you might introduce voice over IP traffic, which is sort of your qualified traffic that you might actually mark with QoE. So for example, voice, typically it's got an SLA around it. You might actually have some toss bit set or DSAP markings on that traffic. So you can do that. You can do that in the product and validate that as that traffic goes across your wide area network, that in fact the routers and switches are adhering to the DSAP markings to assure that voice carries the highest quality versus the background traffic.
Nice.
Okay. So here I'll very quickly focus on just one metric, which is voice over IP. And I know there's a lot of statistics we provide, and I'll just focus on MOS scores. So we happen to have an aggregate amount of metrics, and we're going to go look deep dive a little bit. So here I've switched a view to tell you the performance of every user, and I can tell you the MOS of all the users. Now, typically, MOS is computed very straightforward. 7-Eleven happens to have a perfect score of 4.37. It's just the theoretical maximum. So if you're getting close to that and you decide that based on your network, that quality is acceptable, then that's a good test. And if you decide that 3.95 is an acceptable metric for MOS, then that's the SLA by which you actually measure your network's performance.
Oh, okay. So this actually lets you figure out what is normal for your network.
Yes, because no two networks, and rightly so, from my administrator's point of view, is going to run the same. So, for example, you have a remote office that has a DSL service. Another one might have a actual fiber connectivity. So you can't really assume that voice over IP on one with 50 voice calls is going to carry the same quality as the one that has fiber connectivity. So it's very important that you kind of know the topology of your network, what it's actually running, and then conduct tests based on the nature of the network.
Let me bring Cheebert back into the conversation. Cheebert, again, because you've used this in production settings, how close is this synthetic traffic to what you'd actually see? I mean, this has always been one of the touchy points about these tools that can give you a peek into what your network looks like when it's stressed. And that is, well, is it realistic? Is it just a replay of traffic streams, or are they doing something to make sure that this is a realistic test of how your network would respond?
Okay, so that's you've actually asked two questions there. Yeah, this is real layer 7 traffic. You are actually replaying payloads. Now, one of the things that I haven't been able to do recently, but I believe I saw a press release from IxChariot about it, is being able to capture some data from your application and be able to replay that. I know I could do that with the multicast tests, and I wasn't sure whether or not I could do it for the like web stuff and so forth. But no, it's not just straight replay. There's some variability in there, and you are actually simulating user input. So it's not just one flat line. This is, you'd see the variability of a user going through an interface and things like that. So it's even the older versions had that. The newer versions, I believe you can do a lot more customization in the data flow. But it is great because it does give you a much, much better idea. And I actually use MRTG numbers and data sets I get from friends' networks to create my baseline, my fictitious 10,000 seat enterprise. It's a pretty good tool.
Yeah, and I want to make a comment on that front. So endpoints that, as I mentioned, are if you want to look up endpoints on all the platforms that we have, you can just Google endpoint library and we'll end up being the first hit. You'll see that we run them on actual operating systems that you have, so Windows, Mac, Linux, all different flavors of ARM. And the reason I mentioned that is one of the aspects of having realism is that you want to know the nature of the device that you're running the test on, because that is the device that's in your network. So as an example, when we deploy an endpoint on a server from vendor A, you might have an operating system configured by that vendor, parameters set by their vendor, the IP stack, the TCP stack. So we actually exercise the actual stack that goes all the way from the OS to the stack, to the drivers, to the NIC, out and onto the network. So it's realistic not only from having the applications, but actually we use your devices. So that server from vendor A that you want to qualify for performance, you can very quickly compare it with vendor B by putting the same endpoints on both pieces of hardware.
Right. Taran, I'm afraid we're getting to the end of our hour here, but I would like you to give some knowledge. So give some system tester guru knowledge to our audience out there if they're looking at figuring out how to get more visibility into their networks. What would IxChariot be able to do for them? What should they look at? What should they examine?
Okay, I can do that. In the context of network performance, let's say assessment of your network, and being able to monitor it continuously, I'd offer a couple of things. One is get to know your network. And what does that mean? You want to know the performance of all of the elements in your network, be it floor to floor, building to building, site to site. And how do you do that? Is by having active probes in the network, assess it continuously 24/7 for a period of time to get a very good sense of what your network's health looks like. You'd be surprised how many customers we meet that really don't know their network well enough. And so that's the first advice I'd give, is to do a very good and thorough baseline of your network. And the other one is to be able to continually monitor so that you can have proactive ways to detect the problem. And so what that would mean is you'd instrument tests, let's say voice over IP or web tests that you would run from different places in the network, schedule them, and run them continually such that you are proactively looking at the health of the network and really knowing if that application is actually giving you the quality of experience that you expect in sort of your service level agreement.
Fantastic. Taran Singh, Senior Manager at IxChariot, we want to thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Now, I'm afraid we've reached the end of our time. That's right, you've used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the world. That's according to 9 out of 10 network probes. And I want to thank my panelists, the people who made this show possible, starting with Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, you know it's a pleasure. It's always fun to have you on the show. Your knowledge is absolutely invaluable. Could you please tell the Dwight Right what you're up to, what you're doing this next week, and tell them why it is that your network seems to be blowing up?
Actually, I don't know yet. My IT group hasn't fessed up, but I'm sure I'll twist some arms and find out. I am actually building a VDI rollout for Kapiolani Community College. It's a proof of concept, so we'll see how that goes. Now, I will say one last parting thing. Taran forgot to mention it, that you could actually go to IxChariot.com and sign up for some information, and you can actually get, I think it's a 30-day trial of IxChariot, and that'll give you a chance to actually take it for a test drive, because all you really need is a trial license for the console. Once you have the console, you can download all the endpoints you want and actually go and run the test, prove how valuable it is to your bean counters, and go get a real copy afterwards, because knowing what you can and can't do on your network can go a long way to keeping your job.
Be careful, folks, though, because the first taste is free, but once you try it, you're not going to want to let it go. Oh, we also want to thank Taran Singh for coming all the way over here. Thank you for coming into the Brick House, for being in the studio. Again, Cheebert and I have both used your products extensively, so it's always great to have a representative from IxChariot come on and tell us how we can get visibility into our networks. If you could please tell the Dwight Right where they can find you, where they can find IxChariot. And Cheebert just did a plug for your software, but maybe you could give another one. Where should they go to find out more about IxChariot and IxChariot?
And I'm glad to be here. And my plug would be that we host a weekly, a monthly webinar for customers interested in looking at the product, understanding how it works. So I'd invite you to go to our website, look up IxChariot, and you can sign up for a live webinar that we run monthly. And that's where you can find me.
Cheebert, Taran, thank you again. And also, thank you, our audience, our loyal listener, our loyal viewer, the person who comes back week after week to get all you can eat out of enterprise goodness. We want to do a little something for you. We want to make it easy for you to get every episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech in the device of your choice. If you go to our show page at twit.tv/Twyet, you'll find all of our episodes available for download. You'll find our show notes, and you'll find a little drop-down menu that tells you where you can get these episodes automatically into your iPhone, your iPad, your Android tablet or phone, your Mac, your PC, your desktop, your laptop. No matter what version you have or what device you have, we've got a way for you to get all the goodness and the hotness automatically. Also, why not follow me on Twitter? Did you know you can find me at twitter.com/PadreSJ? If you follow me on Twitter, you'll find out what we're going to be doing each week on This Week in Enterprise Tech. Plus, you'll find what I'm doing for all the other shows I do on the Twit TV network. That includes Padres Corner tomorrow, Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. On Thursdays, you'll see me twice, once at 11 o'clock with Brian Burnett from Know How, where we take you through some of the projects that we've been geeking out over. And at 1:30, I'm doing Coding 101 with Shannon Morse. You know, it's kind of a network family thing going on. Yeah. Also, as long as you're going to watch the show, why not watch us live? We film every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time here at live.twit.tv. If you watch us live, you can see the pre-show, the post-show, and everything in between, which means you get to see all the bloopers and the cutouts that don't make it into the final cut. It's part of the experiment that is in Twit TV. Also part of that experiment is our live chat room at irc.twit.tv. If you log in, you get to talk to us during the show. You'll see me pulling questions out from the chat room. You'll see me talking to the people who are some of the brightest, some of the funniest, and some of the biggest trolls on the internet. It's all, again, part of the experiment that is Twit TV. Finally, thanks to everyone who makes this show possible here in the Brick House, to Lisa, to Leo, to my super producer, Karsten, and to my TD, who today is Mr. Cranky Hippo, Brian Burnett. Brian, I understand that you're not just a TD, you're also a host.
Occasionally. I like to think that I'm a TD then a host. But
I see.
Yeah, you know, when I'm doing that show Know How with you, which I think this week will be pretty cool because you've almost obliterated all the quadcopters that you've been playing with.
We have to delay that because all the quadcopters I built broke. You have to test them. If you don't test them, it's not a fair segment. Yeah. But follow us on twitter.com. I'm at twitter.com/PadreSJ. He's twitter.com/crankyhippo_hippo. Make sure to follow us and see what we're doing on our shows. And until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.